Chapter 4 The Beginning of the Night. "Do you have her?" Nick asked. Spino nodded. "She doesn't want her mother to find her." "I don't care. Where is she?" Nick demanded. Mabel slightly poked her head out from behind Spino's right ankle and said, "Dad?" Nick was relieved and sighed. "Thank God." He was about to explain the new developments to Nick and Spino when someone ran past on the street that ran alongside the backyard. Nick waved and shouted, "Tony! Secure the gate and put all the guards we have on the wall! Everyone! And keep them out of the trenches! We're on lockdown!" Tony, usually the head of the midday watch on the south wall, nodded and kept running down the street. "And I want a skeleton crew surrounding the gate at all times!" Nick called after him. Tony paused for a moment, turned around and called, "That would break protocol!" Nick sighed with mild frustration and then shouted, "I know! I wrote the damn protocol! Just do what I say!" With a nod, Tony turned away and continued sprinting down the street. Nick turned back to Mabel and Spino once Tony was out of sight and explained everything to them, and said that no one would be leaving the community anytime soon. Mabel didn't understand. "Trees are talking and shooting darts at people that kill them?" Nick shrugged and said, "At the moment, your guess is as good as mine." "Have you told Mom?" Mabel asked. "Yes," Nick said, nodding. "Now, you two stay in town as far away from the walls as possible. Spino, please keep a close eye on her for me. I'm going to be very busy and need your help." "You know I'll do anything for you," Spino said. "I know. Thank you," Nick replied before leaving the two and going back into the house. He opened the door, walked in, and closed it behind him. "Did you find her?" Susan asked as Nick entered the house. "Yes, she was with Spino," Nick replied as he walked back into the kitchen. "She didn't go out there and try to get herself eaten again, did she?" Susan asked. There was venom in her voice. Nick sighed. "No, and leave them alone. We know where she is, and I don't want to risk her running off again. Promise me you will leave them alone." His voice firm, and his eyes had a dangerous look in them. His tone made it clear that the conversation was finished. Susan gave a reluctant nod. "Good. Put Mama Bear back in hibernation for a while. We can have a calm discussion over Spino's method of keeping our daughter safe when this issue is resolved," Nick said, and left the house through the front door. Mabel sat against Spino's shoulder, and they shared nervous gazes. Both were unnerved by what Nick had said. It sounded completely bizarre, and it didn't make sense at all. The post-apocalyptic world was full of weird, strange, and mysterious anomalies, but voices in the trees? People getting shot by deadly darts? What was going on? It was a scenario that sounded bizarre, even in such a strange world. "You know, Mabel, I have seen a lot of weird, unexplainable things over the years," Spino eventually commented. "But I think this takes the prize for the top spot. Talking trees is even stranger than... well, even stranger than the way the old world was destroyed when your dad was younger." Mabel didn't reply. She remained leaning against his side in silence. Eventually, she spoke. "Why does my mom think you're bad? I feel the safest when I'm with you." Spino sighed. "You know, what I think it comes down to is what I said before. You guys see the world differently than I do. What I see as a reasonable option clearly wasn't in the eyes of a certain mother." "Well, I don't care what she thinks about you," Mabel replied. "I feel safer sitting with you out here, Spino, than I would inside that house without you." Tony climbed up onto the wall's walkway for the guards and stood next to the main gate. His brother, Ben, stood next to him, and they scanned the road for as far as they could see. Empty. It stayed empty for a long time until they saw movement. Something crossed the road, nearly too far away to be seen. Tony squinted and chuckled. It was just his favorite dinosaur as a kid. Nothing to worry about. It's just a Styracosaurus. Lucky bugger. I wish we had some of its armor, Tony said. Maybe it would stop the stinging. Forget that. I wish we had some napalm, Ben replied. Burn this whole damn forest to the ground and then talking trees wouldn't be a problem. Well, that would also take care of the sightline problem. Unfortunately, it probably would burn the community down with it, Tony replied with a slight chuckle. So, even if we find some drums of napalm at some abandoned military base one day, I say we just leave it there. Nick spent the next hour gathering all the off-duty guards for the community, as well as some volunteers, guards in training, and people from the community's militia, along with anyone else who was young and fit enough for what he had planned. I want volunteers, Nick explained once he had everyone gathered in one place. Tonight, we stand on the wall, facing the forest, shoulder to shoulder, all of us armed. At the first sign of anything unusual, we fire into the trees and don't stop until whatever we saw is dead, Nick continued. This isn't a requirement. I'm asking. He finished speaking, and everyone present all volunteered to help protect their home. Everyone who volunteered was provided a weapon from the armory and was given a specific set of tasks to complete before night fell. A majority of those who volunteered were recruited to help with the next part of Nick's plan. This part of the plan would be carried out throughout the afternoon and evening. Throughout the rest of that day, the people who lived near the walls were moved out of their homes and told to go to the center of town. It was an unpopular but reasonably cautious move by Nick. He wanted to make sure everyone who lived close to the wall would be out of range of any darts, or anything else, that happened to be fired over the wall by the unseen threat during the night. During the evacuation, one little boy cried and asked his mother why they had to leave. Nick saw this and walked over to him. Hey, buddy, he said. This is just a one-night thing. It's to make sure you're safe. Now be brave. Show your mom how brave you are. The boy sniffed and whimpered. I'm brave. Nick smiled. Good. You're a future guard for sure. He took notice of the toy in the kid's hand and asked, Dimetrodon, is that your favorite animal? The kid nodded. Uh-huh. They have big, scary teeth. I want one for a pet. Nick laughed. I tell you what, after this stuff is over, I'll go into the forest and find a talking one for you. He smiled once more at the kid and then stood up and nodded apologetically to the mother. I know this isn't ideal, but I want everyone to be safe because we don't know what's out there. No, it's okay. Until we know what's going on, keeping everyone away from the walls is probably best. I'll just think of it as a community-wide sleepover, she replied, her manner assuring but on edge. She took her son off to find a place for their stuff and to lay down their blankets. No, the park will be the most comfortable area, Nick called after her. I told the volunteers to make sure families with children get priority for sleeping there, but it'll fill up fast. You might want to head that way now. Around him, more families were moved from their homes. Children cried or screamed about leaving their homes and toys. Entire families took only necessities. Sleeping bags or blankets, pets, water and food, and books or games for entertainment. Some of the older kids met up with their friends and started telling scary stories or played games of tag and hide-and-seek amongst the crowds. After watching this part of his plan for nearly an hour, Nick walked to the side and took a break from it all. He was uncertain about how all this made him feel. As he leaned against the side of a house, he heard heavy footsteps and saw Spino's head peek around the corner of the building. Mabel was with him, napping, and Spino had her cradled in his arms. Are you okay? Spino asked. Not really, Nick sighed. I hate seeing you like this, Spino replied and laid down, wrapping his body around his friend to hide Nick from the others on the street. Nick walked across the small enclosure and rubbed Spino's snout with a slight smile. I'm worried. I'm worried that this'll be it. That we'll lose this time, he admitted. This is nothing like the kind of threat the Dino Riders presented, or the kind of threat small, random groups of marauders present. Spino snorted and gave Nick a small lick across the side of the head. "We won't lose," he said, softly but confidently. Nick wiped the saliva off his face and shook his head before his eyes gazed at Mabel. "At least she seems peaceful. Thank you for watching her every day." Spino nodded. "She's been in a good mood most of the afternoon, all things considered. She just finally got tired and decided she wanted a nap, but she didn't want to go inside the house." Nick nodded. Again, "Thank you. You you two have such a wonderful connection. It's different than the one we have. It's special, and I'm happy she'll grow up with you at her side." "Don't sell yourself short, Nick. You're her father. You'll be there for her as she grows up too. You gave her a home. You sang to her on nights she was scared. You fed her soup when she was sick. Every time you look at her, your eyes light up and you look 10 years younger. You have that special connection that only a father and child have. I'm just the cool older brother who likes poking fun at his little sister," Spino said, chuckling. After a few seconds, Nick began to laugh as well. In a seemingly empty clearing deep in the forest, the ambient silence was broken suddenly by voices, but no one speaking could be seen anywhere. The voices seemed to have no source at all, like ghosts talking. "It looks like they're preparing for us. Do we do it tonight?" "Yes," another voice hissed from a tree. "We do it tonight. We end them tonight. They don't see us. They won't. They'll all die by the unseen. We've never taken on a big group. They have many weapons. We must remain unseen to win. We mustn't be drawn out. We always remain unseen," another voice said. "And even if they saw us, they'd never win." With that, there was the sound of dozens of creatures moving through the forest. However, all the while, the clearing remained completely empty. Some of the guards and volunteers were already on the wall and watching the woods. Others, acting on Nick's orders, tried to find people who might have still been hiding in their homes to avoid having to sleep outside. While that was going on, Nick was trying to spearhead everything and keep the people calm and their movements orderly when he, literally, ran into his wife. "Sorry," Nick said, trying to brush past her and keep going once he was sure that she hadn't fallen from their sudden impact. Susan turned to follow him and grabbed his shoulder. "Nick, can we talk?" "Not now," Nick replied. "I don't have time for a heart-to-heart. I've got to get this place ready for whatever's coming." "I need to talk to you," Susan insisted, following him. Nick turned, looked at his wife, and said with some force, "What?" I want to know something. I want to know if, after this is over, we could maybe try again," she said with some hope. Nick sighed. "You put Mama Bear back to sleep, huh?" "No," Susan admitted. "But I did have an epiphany while watching you organize all this." "And what was that?" Nick asked. "I've been a real bitch since last night," Susan replied. Nick half chuckled. "No, you were just acting like an overprotective mother. Mine was the same way. One of the only good things there was about her." "You've never mentioned that. Is that why you stayed so calm when I threw you out?" It helped. I also knew that more fighting on the issue right then would only make things worse," Nick said. He smiled slightly and took Susan's hand and said, "We don't have to try again. I knew you didn't mean the things you said last night." Susan sighed and wiped some tears from her eyes and whimpered, so sorry for what I said. I know. And I know you didn't mean any of it. I forgave what you said already. I did last night. I, I, thank you, Susan replied, unable to find the words. Nick gave her a comforting pat on the shoulder, promising that they would have a real heart-to-heart conversation later. He gently kissed her cheek and then turned and walked away. Throughout the community, many people were sharing what they would do when the forest scare was over. Just as it had been during the fight with the Dino Riders, they were looking forward to and talking about the future. It was a great way to increase morale among the shaken masses. One of the guards was a man of Native American descent, and he was saying that if they survived whatever happened next, he would finally do something he'd been planning since the apocalypse began. He would return to his people and his ancestors' land. Others said that they just wanted to save their loved ones or save the community that they had built with their bare hands. Still, others looked forward to a better future. As the sun began to set, the sky turned a fiery mix of shades of oranges, pinks, and yellows. Susan was watching her daughter, who was lying against Spino's side. She was still sleeping. Susan still didn't understand how Mabel was so content being near that dinosaur, but this wasn't the time to worry about it. She was worried about Nick, and she wondered what was going to happen to the baby. Her worries were stemmed from the fact that they were trapped. They couldn't send a request to the other communities for help because they couldn't enter the woods, which meant that they were on their own. Everyone was forced to wait for something that might happen. As the tension settled into the air with a near physical force, Nick approached his top scout and pulled him aside quietly. "Steve, you're my right-hand man. The best one I've got in this whole community," he said. Standing between two houses, out of everyone's sight, Nick leaned in and whispered, "If something happens to me, you're in charge." Steve looked very nervous but nodded slowly. Nick then added, "I want you and a few others to take inventory. We have to be ready for the worst-case scenario. We'll need an escape plan. If tonight goes bad, if it looks like we can't win, we're going to have to make a dash for the nearest community. So, meet up with the people you think are best for this assignment. But tell them to keep it hush-hush for now. I'm going to go up on the wall with the rest of the guards. I want people to be reassured that we've got this." Nick patted Steve's shoulder, turned to leave, crossed the community grounds, and joined the guards at the main gate. He passed his family and nodded to Susan as he moved on. The sun had set by then, and it was nearly dark by the time he climbed up onto the wall. Standing to the right side of the gate, he waited for what might come with everyone else. As the night dragged on, the guards on the walls were stonily silent. No one spoke, no one made quips or jabs. They all just watched and listened, waiting. The forest was silent, save for the sound of insects buzzing in the trees. As hours passed and nothing happened, no one felt any easier. In fact, the tension increased because of the stillness. Suddenly, darts came at them from nowhere. Spino didn't like the silence that had settled over the community once night fell, but he stayed still and didn't move away from his family to investigate the cause. He'd been given some secret orders by Nick. If an attack did come at any point in the night, he was to protect Mabel at any cost and not worry about what might happen to Nick. Spino accepted his mission, and he hadn't moved from his spot at Mabel's side for hours. He felt the tension increasing in the community as the night dragged on, but he was hopeful that nothing would happen. But then, it did, and suddenly, it was as if the world was ending. To be continued. Thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed this new narrated story. It was the 6th part in the story of Nick and Spino, and I know I said this in an ominous element, but this one is definitely going to be the last narration following these two. To see what happens next and how things play out from here, stay tuned because my original novel is hopefully coming soon. We've covered basically all the setup and rising action in these 6 narration videos. Now, you have to sit on this cliffhanger of things finally getting into full swing until the book releases. I've wanted to be an author basically my whole life, so actually getting the chance to do it is kind of unreal, and it means a lot if you sat here and gave my story a chance. I know I'm a tease with the cliffhanger, but there's plenty more you can listen to from this same universe. Check out the playlist linked below. It has every narration I've done in chronological order. Some have different tones than others, with this being a more character-focused survival story, while my story version 2, or a survivor's daily routine, as it is also called on here, is a full-on horror story instead. And that story is basically from a spin-off novella I've written as well, which is in the same universe, and it's one that I'm particularly proud of. I'll also put a video below of me discussing the characters and the story if you want to get my personal insight into the cast, and even into some characters you've not met yet. This is also not the start of Wave 4. I was just itching to make a new narration, partially because I simply love these characters, so I thought, why not do this little one as a one-off video between Wave 3 and Wave 4? Wave 4 will probably come in the summer, or maybe a little sooner. So, listen to the other stories in the meantime, and please, give feedback. I'd love it. I love seeing feedback. I want to know all the opinions before I publish the book itself. If you like dinosaurs and paleo media, I assume you do because you're listening to a story with dinosaurs, check out my thoughts on 65 or my educational videos about paleo topics. All will be linked in the description as well. Thank you for listening, and have a good one. To see what happens next and how things play out, stay tuned, if I can speak, if I can English correctly. Stay tuned, and